What's up, L3 Warriors? Welcome to this episode of Elite in Action, where we talk to elite individuals to learn about the choices they're making to find happiness and success in their lives. I'm Coach Jackson, and joining me today is Alex Bazzell. Alex is an outstanding example of what having vision, focus, and work ethic and how that can lead to achievement in your life. Alex, thank you very much for joining me, spending some time today. I appreciate that.
Of course.
First of all, congratulations on, it's been a big year for you. Got married.
Yep.
And had a baby,
Yep.
Mila.
Had a child, yeah.
That's awesome, man.
Life's moving.
It's great.
Life's moving. So yeah, it's been a great year.
That's it. I know you're a successful individual, but the greatest thing you'll ever do and the most important thing you'll ever do in life is be a parent. So.
Absolutely. I've already started to understand that.
Yeah.
You know, like you think you have a lot going on. You think you have a lot of important stuff going on. Once you have a kid, that everything falls, to the back burner on that. So it's been the best blessing. Of course, it's, as you know, early. It's a battle of understanding schedule and all those things. But yeah, it's been awesome.
Yeah, that's cool. So you've had a great basketball career. You were a 1,000-point scorer in high school, scored 1,300 points, and set the record for most assists. When you played at Lindenwood in college, played professionally in Germany. Mm-hmm. What kind of sacrifices have you had to make, and what kind of work ethic and work have you had to put in order to achieve on the basketball court?
See, I always feel like I'm really lucky because I've always just followed my passion, right? Like, to me, when I look back at like my journey of being just an athlete, a lot of people would look at it as major sacrifices. I looked at it as like just something I always wanted to do. Right. So there were times where there were parties or there were events where there were things going on. And I just chose I wanted to stay home and I wanted to train, or I wanted to go work out, or I wanted to go play. And that was never like a sacrificial thing that I did. Right. So I'm very blessed to not have to ever felt like I was working in order to reach my goals. It was just something that's like, I love this thing. I want to follow it. I want to see it through, and I want to become the best I can be at it. And that's kind of how I've always really looked at basketball. Certainly there's times and there's days where you don't want to do something, and that doesn't matter how fun things are, where you're feeling lazy, or you're feeling like overworked, or you're just mentally exhausted. Those are still relevant, right? Like you're always going to go through those days, but I always looked at, am I still chasing those goals? And I think my father, I would credit him a lot with implementing that work ethic without pushing me to go do these things, right? Like putting in little, things like if I'm sitting on the couch, he would just walk by and say, someone out there's getting better. And he would just keep moving. Yeah. And it was just something that would stick in the back of my brain, and it would just infest into me until I was like, all right, I can't deal with this right now. I need to go out and work. But he just knew how I was wired. I think he was wired that way growing up, and we were able to relate so well in that instance, where we never really ever had to come to blows on, am I working hard enough? Am I doing things the right way? So yeah, I was very blessed to have an incredible atmosphere around me, built by my parents, of like my mother being very loving and understanding like the value of who you are is not with what you do on the court. And then my father, who would implement the aspects of being a good teammate and being punctual and being consistent and being, self-aware, all these aspects that mold who I feel like I am now as a person, all was built through that journey of basketball.
Yeah, you were talking about that earlier, how a lot of people think about basketball as just a sport, just a competition. Mm-hmm. When in reality, if you're doing it right, you're learning life lessons along the way. How to build relationships, how to be a teammate, work ethic, like you said, punctuality, being on time. Those are all great lessons that are learned through athletics.
Yeah, absolutely. That's
awesome. It's cool that you had good parents that understood that and weren't like sports parents that are like, like pushing you too hard to the point. Because I've seen that so much where people get pushed to the point and they're like, man, whenever they're done, they're done.
Right. Well, and I think some of that is, and it from having children, of you want to make sure you're instilling the correct things without trying to live through them. Yeah. Right. And that's the biggest challenge for a lot of parents. And even, as I began training young kids of, understanding there's got to be a healthy boundary of being a parent and then being someone who's just trying to push what you feel they should be doing with their lives or how you feel they should be going about it, because everyone's journey is so different, right? Like I had teammates that they went on to accomplish a lot of great things as well. And we had kind of different blueprints. There were a lot of similarities, but it's never the same. And I think you can see it even with kids of your own. They all have different journeys. Yeah. They all grow up under the different of the same moral foundation, but they all have their different routes of how they feel like they should be getting there. And I think that was so important for me. My parents allowed that flexibility for me to choose and for me to fail and for me to learn how to pick myself back up, right? And for them to always be that like net. And that's where I feel like I'm so blessed to grow up in a household where I always felt like I had that net from my parents to certainly my 3 older siblings. So it's a lot of it I would attribute it to circumstance and just how we were brought up.
That's cool. Very cool. I tell kids a lot in class that if you just set your vision high, aim high, go after something with everything you've got, that even if you don't achieve that, so a lot of times you'll end up with something just as good or maybe even better. Mm-hmm. In your life, I'm not sure how much you decided, I want to play in the NBA, mm-hmm. and you didn't get to the NBA, but you played professional basketball, and now you train NBA guys. Mm-hmm. So you basically ended up at that, and you had said earlier that you got kind of, you're kind of at that level, but it's a lot easier on your body and that type of thing. It's a little bit easier lifestyle. So you achieved something really great there. How were you able to take something that you, like you said, was your passion, mm-hmm. and turn it into a career now that's, supporting you and your family?
Well, so it was just a journey of, I certainly wanted to play in the NBA, right? When I was young and I was on the driveway and I would visualize, Kobe was my favorite player. Steve Nash was my second favorite player. So I always used to go out, I'd watch them on TV, I would go emulate them on the driveway. I'd come back in, I'd watch, and I'd go and emulate them on the driveway. And that was how I learned. Like when I was growing up, training wasn't really a relevant thing, right? Like we would show up to open gym, mm-hmm. we would get a ton of player development in our practices, right? So like with Coach Hollander building the foundation of learning how to pass left-handed, like mm-hmm. a lot of professional teams don't work on that stuff, right? And it's stuff you take for granted. And I think there's those aspects led me to understand that, like, okay, here's where I want to go. And one of the best things I learned when I was actually a freshman in college, Kyle Korver played 15 plus years in the NBA. He's one of the best statistical shooters of all time, like still has the NBA 3-point percentage record for a season over Steph Curry, which most people don't know. And he always had a saying of aim small, miss small, right? Like, I am going to aim at this specific target. And if I miss, that's okay. But if I miss, I'm probably not going to miss by too much, mm-hmm. right? And I think that's what you're alluding to with, it was probably in college where I understood, or towards the end of high school, I understood I probably wasn't going to the NBA. It didn't change how I worked. It didn't change my mindset. But I'm very self-aware, which I think helps me at times. Uh-huh. And I think it reignited. I never thought about overseas. It never crossed my brain. And it was Coach Soderberg that pulled me aside my sophomore year. And it was, I remember it. We were in preseason, we were working out, and we were at the HIT training center, which I don't even know still exists by the Recflex. And he's like, hey, I think you have a real chance to go play professionally overseas. If you ever want to think about it, come talk to me and let's dive in and let's see what we can do to make that happen. So again, that positive reinforcement of someone saying, hey, you're good enough to do this. It reignited a different mission for me, which I think led me towards the molding of how I looked at the next 3 years of my college career. I was so driven and focused to say, sure, I may not make the NBA, but if I can go do this thing that 0.01% people get to do, that's something I always have. And it's not something to where I can say externally to people, yes, I play professional basketball. It was just something like those hundreds of hours that I spent, where did it ultimately end me? So for me, my mission was always to go use basketball then as a vehicle to go experience different things, right? So my mindset shifted from how can this help me make money to how can this help me experience different cultures and atmospheres and places that I would maybe never have the chance to go do. So it's funny, like the way your mind develops and works and understands that. We talk about this all the time in my family, is the way we look at money is it affords us more experiences together. It doesn't change how I look at life, or if I have more money, I'm at a different place. To me, it's only about experiences and like spending time with people you love, right? So that's where I focus my energy in basketball towards, is how many experiences could I then do? Yeah. And then with training, it was just one of those things where I felt like I had reached my mission. I had done the things that I wanted to do. I started running camps in the summertime just to kind of see what that was like. And it kind of led me down this route of, there's a lot of kids that actually think or move or act the way I did when I was young. How do I help mold them and help them accelerate things to where, maybe I didn't understand at that time. So that's where my mission focused from me to the community of St. Charles based kids that like all were very talented and hungry. So it's just weird the way life ends up directing you and pushing you, and you end up exactly where you need to be.
Yeah. That's a good perspective. I feel the same way. You look back and there are things that happen in life when you're in it at the time, you're like, why? And a lot of times those things are even challenging or bad, negative things. You're like, why is this happening? And then later you look back and you're like, oh, it makes sense now. And that's tough to do in the moment, but that's cool. And like you said, it leads to some great places. You've, along the lines of your training, you've trained Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, Candace Parker, Trae Young, Carmelo Anthony. Like, you've trained a lot of elite athletes. Is there anything that you've learned that, like, all elite individuals, all individuals that accomplish at a high level, is there something that they do?
Man, that's a great question. I think there's a lot of similarities of what athletes do. I think self-motivation is very high on the list. No athlete I work with do I ever have to say, hey, you got to work a little bit harder, because to me that's a very short-lived thing. If I have to motivate you to work a little bit harder for this stretch of 30 minutes to an hour, you're going to go back to your old habits of doing what you normally do, right? So I think it's important for not just athletes, but for people to understand the relevance of like the power of your mind. And I think the mindset is, like, when you say that list, to me, it still blows my mind. Like, there's times I don't even contemplate like how many great athletes I've been able to and fortunate enough to work with. And I think the number one thing is certainly the fact that they've all understood the power of their mind is always going to outweigh what their body can do. And like, there's so many more talented people that I've met along the way that are probably more talented than some of the people that you've listed. But their mindset was completely different. They were focused. They were disciplined. They were self-motivated. They were self-aware. They were self-accountable. All these things that like internally drove them to become better. That had nothing to do with talent. They had that talent, sure, but there's thousands of people that I've seen. There's people overseas that are just as talented as NBA players or WNBA players, but the mind is so much more powerful than any skill that you're giving. And I was listening to someone saying, skill sometimes can actually be a detriment when you rely on it too much. Yeah. Right? Sure. Where there's a lot of people, even in the NBA, you see it all the time, or professional sports, people that there's no way you look at them, you're like, how is this person in the league? But they have that something in their mind and internally that drives them and pushes them, that separates them from everyone else. Yeah. So that would be the number one thing. I don't know if it was like a clear cut, here's exactly what it is. I think it's just all internal. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great, man. The more people that can, build confidence and generate confidence, but then also understand that they're like, everybody has days when they don't want to. It's those days whenever you have to, you need to, because you're developing, like you said, mental toughness. And those are the days that you're separating yourself from everybody else that doesn't want to and is not going to.
Well, that's something I think some of that was taken from like how my father was saying someone out there is getting better. Yeah. That's the number one separator, right? Like, there's certain things everyone does because they have to do it, whether it's showing up to practice, showing up to school, showing up to work, right? Yeah. Showing up to family obligations. That's the baseline minimum. And it's great if you do those things at a high level. But like when you leave, and this is why I've never, ever taken credit for anything that a client of mine has done, because I understand how much work it takes on your own time to become whatever you're trying to become, right? So like when I'm not with Kyrie or with Trey or with Candace, what they're doing on their own time is actually the separator, right? What I'm doing is trying to build that foundation stronger. And then when they leave me or when they leave practice, what are you doing when you're at home? Yeah. That's the reason that like most successful people are successful. Most smart kids who are getting good grades, it's because they actually focus when the bell rings. That doesn't mean their mind shuts off, right? So I think that's something that's a common attribute to anyone I've ran across that's successful. And I think that's one of the most important things of now how I try to channel my energy from being an athlete to now being an entrepreneur or being a trainer. It's very similar.
Kobe Bryant has a great quote that I share in class. I absolutely love. He says, and I hope I'm not misquoting, but he says, "I have nothing in common with lazy people that blame other people for their lack of success. You know, hard work and dedication, and that's it. No excuses."
Yeah.
He tells a story. I show the kids a video also. He tells a story of whenever he was like, I don't know, 7 years old, 8 years old, and playing in a league in Philadelphia, and played an entire season in this league and didn't score a point.
Yeah.
That blows my mind. And hopefully kids, I try to draw the link for them that here's one of the best that's ever played the game. And he went from, and he even says, well, the guy asked him, why didn't you score? He's like, I wasn't any good. Mm-hmm. One of the best that ever played the game wasn't any good whenever he was younger, and yet he was able to become one of the best in the game.
Yep.
So what happened between point A and point B?
See, I was so fortunate to work with Kobe from 2017 all the way up to the accident. And I got to watch him try to help mold the same mission and blueprint he had. He tried to implement into these young girls that all wanted to become great basketball players. So they were like 10, 11 years old. And he had a great balance of understanding that, like, I can't be overbearing because I don't want to run them into the ground mentally. But he's like, if you want to become great, I want you to tell me you want to become great. I don't want me to tell you. So he's like, I allowed everyone to say, hey, what's everyone's mission here? And they're like, well, I want to play in the WNBA, or I want to play Division I basketball, or I want to do whatever. He's like, cool. Now you're going to sign this contract with yourself that says, this is something I'm holding myself to. This is a binding contract between me and me that's going to focus my energy over these next 10 years, whatever it is, right? But the story about him not scoring, I actually witnessed that, not to that level. I witnessed these girls who weren't great when I first met them. But what people don't realize is Kobe was there every single night, Monday through Friday, 2 hours a night, coaching these girls every night. He's like, I'm not a once a night parent. Like that. What does that foundation lay for these kids that say, "Hey, I want to do these things," and I'm like, "Cool, like show up every Tuesday at 6, and we'll go after it, and then I'll see you next Tuesday." So it's incredible. Someone who has that much of a filled schedule to say, every night I'm blocking these 2 hours off, and these girls I'm gonna help them improve. But they were a bad basketball team, because he didn't go handpick the top players from the area. He's like, okay, these are the girls that want to play together. Let's set off on this journey and see what happens. So, they lost. There's a picture on his Instagram of the girls celebrating. So they had lost to that same team by like 30 or 40, like just got blown out the year before. And then they returned and they won something crazy, like 124 to 38. And they took it over a year. Wow. He's like, because they just worked and worked and worked, and it was consistent. So it's funny, like the people look at it, and you can still look at his Instagram, but there's like 10 of the girls that are jumping in front of, like celebrating in front of the scoreboard. And most people look at that as like, that's not the way you should be teaching these kids. And he's like, no, like people see the small surface level of what Instagram shows. what they didn't see of the hours and hours and hours of work and being humiliated by that team, and understanding that like this is a part of your journey, right? And how do you help that motivate you the next time you show up and play? So he's like, these girls learn such a mission, and then at the end of that mission, it's okay to stop and you know, celebrate the little wins along the way.
Yeah.
He's like, that's part of being a kid, right? Like that's part of, and people lose that as they become older, right? He's like, so I want to make sure my girls are still enjoying the hours you're putting in. That doesn't mean once you get to the NBA you can relax, or WNBA you can relax. He's like, but along the way there's going to be things that happen, good or bad. You have to evaluate them for what they are, enjoy them, and then move on. The journey continues. So it's funny, like I got to witness that behind the scenes, and I think it goes back to living vicariously through your kids. He had an incredible balance of being a father and then being a coach, and he's like, being a coach will never trump being a father, and that's why I was brought in. I was fortunate, like right place, right time kind of guy, where certainly Kobe didn't look at me as like, okay, you have more knowledge in the game of basketball, I want you to train Gigi. That's certainly not how it went, but he understood. He's like, I have to be a father first,
Yeah.
right? So I want you to be the one that's implementing all of these things that we talk about. So to me, it was, tell everyone, it was the best paid internship anyone could have possibly asked for, you know. And it's a lot of the stuff that I do today on a daily basis are just from a lot of his teachings through observation and through actual, you know, implementation of what he was telling me that he focuses on.
That's cool. You were mentioning earlier that your dad and your parents instilled in you that your self-worth is not tied to what you can do, how you can dribble basketball or whatever. And he kind of told us this story, the same thing. At the end of that season, his dad, you know, basically said, you know, you didn't score a point, so what? You know, that's not going to make me love you any less. And he said that gave him the courage to be able to fail, to go out and try and be okay failing, because he knew, like, my dad's not going to love me any less,
Right.
whether I can dribble basketball or whatever it is. That's cool. That's very cool. That's good life lessons there. Any other things that you learned in working with him about achievement?
Yeah, there are a couple of things that really stand out from what I've learned from him. Number one is being curious, being very curious. And he used to cold call people that weren't in his industry. Like, he would cold call people who were great artists or great entrepreneurs or great singers or musicians or whatever it was. And it wasn't because he wanted to become friends with these people. He's like, I want to learn their mindset of what do you do daily that separates you. So he was so he understood the power of, like, when Kobe Bryant's name pops up on a phone, they're probably going to take the time to answer it. He's like, but I want to use that to actually, like, learn, not to just, like, buddy up with someone new. So I think what he drove me to do, and this is how my journey has gone from kind of being more so just a trainer of being an entrepreneur. The second lesson he taught me was, people try to put you in boxes, right? Like society, it could be your parents, it could be your friends, it could be your family, of saying, like, no, this is what you do, right? Don't worry about other stuff. Like, this is what you do. And I think he said that the most important thing is you're the one in charge of creating your own box. It's just your job to dance beautifully within that box, right? So the hardest part about transitioning from more being a full-time trainer to an entrepreneur was breaking the stigma and the narrative of, like, you know, you don't do business stuff, you're a trainer, right? Be a trainer, you're great at that, just keep doing that. So I think what he has allowed me to do is understand that, like, no one else can dictate how I want to choose to live my life, right? As long as I feel like I'm doing it the best of my capabilities and I'm pushing myself and I'm staying curious, then I don't feel like I've ever tapped out, right? And that was, I think, the biggest thing that I've always been worried about is becoming complacent. And to be completely truthful, you know, when Kobe had passed away and the girls had passed away, there was a lot of my mission of training really fell down to a low level of, I wasn't as motivated, because to me, I had felt like this incredible, selfishly, this incredible gift of learning and value and friendship and mentorship, and then like helping these young girls chase was all like taken.
Yeah.
And to me, I didn't understand why. So a lot of it led to me saying, what am I trying to accomplish over these next 10 years or 5 years or 15 years? So it led me down a different path that he was actually preparing me for without understanding he was actually preparing me for it. So it was the stuff that you aren't, a lot of lessons that I've learned is actually, I don't even know if they've been intentional from my parents, from my teammates, from my coaches, from my mentors. It was just through observation. And I think and that's where Kobe was like, I want to try to take the best from what people are doing and try to implement or find ways if I can implement it in my own lives and now into like my kids' lives. So that's where I think the biggest value lies, is if you look throughout life, you're going to run across people that it doesn't matter how big or small they are in terms of following or social network, whatever it might be. But I think there's so much value to be gained from your peers and from people around you that most people just don't understand or look at. Or by that time, as you know, like there's a lot of people being like, damn, I wish I would have listened a little bit more, or maybe learned a little bit more, taken the time to ask deeper questions to my teachers or mentors or peers. That's where I think the value lies, right? Like, and I think everyone has that opportunity. I was so fortunate to run into someone like Kobe, where certainly he can open doors a little bit quicker, but all the stuff he was implementing, everyone still has the ability to do. Certainly they can't call up a famous musician, but you could still call people or ask questions or do these things. And I think being curious is like one of the most valuable assets in life that's completely free. And that's something that I try to kind of implement from him.
I'm so glad that you made that point, because that's one of the things that's kind of one of our bases for the class that I teach, Live, Learn, Lead, Elite, is Coach Hollander used to say, smart people learn from other people's mistakes. Stupid people have to make those mistakes for themselves. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of on the negative end, like don't do this because you end up with consequence, A or whatever. Yep. But you can flip that around, and like you're saying, you can look around, you can say, okay, wait a minute, that person is having some success. They're happy in life. What is it they have that, or they're doing that I'm not, or that I can, I can take and borrow and implement and that type of thing. And if people just do that, like it's everywhere. Yeah. And if people just do that, like you're saying, there's great things to be learned and beauty to be had in your own life. Mm-hmm. If you can just kind of try to,
there's got to be a healthy balance of that, because I got sucked into that from a higher level of looking at other trainers and what they were doing. And I learned it to like a negative motivation of like, why am I not there? Why do I not have that list of clients? What am I doing wrong? Instead of using it to say, how can I learn from this, right? So that's the balance of like, in society where we live and kids live, of looking at something someone may have based on social media and saying, well, I'm not at that level, right? So I think that's the hard balance of understanding that no one else's circumstances should ever dictate your own, right? And that's something I had to learn through the natural progression of maturity, of your own value. It's not even about what you do, and it's certainly not about what others do. That's, I think, the biggest challenge that most people live through because of social media, because as you know, no one just posts their crap on social media. They're only going to post the good stuff. Yeah. Look at my family, look at these things, look at where I'm going. Yeah. No one's like, man, I'm struggling to pay bills. When's the last time that was ever posted, right? And I think that's the balance of like the mental awareness and the mental health of like today's world, and why the lines have become so blurred, because you have this entity that people are engaged on social media every day, all day, and you look at these great things and you're like, well, what am I doing wrong? So that's, if there were kids that were listening to this and they grow up on social media, you have Be Real, you have TikTok, you have Instagram, like we grew up kind of in the MySpace, Facebook era. But that's not real world, and I think that's the biggest challenge that most kids or even older people go through today as well.
Yeah. There's a difference between comparing yourself to others and looking at others and learning from them. Mm-hmm. And comparing yourself to others is a very dangerous game. Yeah. I mean, you're either going to say, hey, look at me, I'm better than that person right there, and you're going to become content. Yeah. and complacent, or
True.
you're going to look at other people and say, like you said, I don't have what they have. What's wrong with me? That type of thing, which is either way is. So, man, you've been a successful player, built a successful train players, and now you have your business through the lens that you're running with Carmelo Anthony, correct? How have you been able to, it seems like anything you touch, you're able to find success in. How have you been able to do that?
Well, I appreciate the compliment. I don't look at it that way.
Yeah.
So,
because you're a humble individual.
well, not just that. I think that entrepreneurship is a completely different journey. That's a lot of it is solo, right? Where like, because I am the CEO of our company, a lot of the things and decisions I have to make impact the rest of our team. Whereas when you grow up in basketball, it's not just your decisions, it's all other 4 players on the court or even the 7 players on the bench and your coaching staff. So like that responsibility is more scattered. But I think it's a lot of just the same implementation we talked about. All the things that I've learned through sports is the same things that I try to implement within a business. So I think it's a matter of work ethic, being consistent, taking the highs with the lows. Kobe used to say all the time, like mental toughness is not like just pushing through when you're tired. Mental toughness is understanding the value of, and the power of saying there's going to be highs, there's going to be lows. I got to stay somewhere in the middle all the time, right? And like, so that's the way I've always looked at it, because there's a lot of crappy days where it's like, man, this is like, it seems like nothing's going my way, but it doesn't change the mission, And then there's great days where you feel like I've done it, I've figured it out, I'm here. And that's not true either. So to me, I don't ever look at it as like, how do I become successful? Is how am I waking up and do I have a purpose? Yeah. So there's 3 things, and this lives in my phone, that I live by. And I think this is what has made me who I am. Number 1 is, am I being influenced by outside perception? Right? Because like when I left UMKC, I don't know if people know. So I went to UMKC, which is a Division I school. At the time, Lindenwood was an NAIA school, and they're Division I now. I left there, and that there was a lot of people around me that are like, you're leaving a Division I to go to NAIA? And it wasn't about that. It was like an internal purpose that I wanted to come home. I wanted to play the game I love. I wanted to play it with my friends, my former coaches. That's what pushed me. I wasn't worried about like, are people going to look at me differently because I'm no longer a Division I player? Yeah. And it opened up so many doors. By going to Lindenwood, I met Pastor Ori, and he opened up his gym, and I ran my academy out of there for 10 plus years and ran a full business. I would not have built that relationship or connection if I had not transferred. So a lot of those decisions that weren't motivated by an outside perception of who people, or am I worried about, am I living up to the standard of what other people think I should be doing? If I would have lived that way, who knows where I'd be right now? So that's number 1. Number 2 is, am I reaching my full potential with whatever I'm doing? Right? That's obviously very self-explanatory. And the number 3 is, did I wake up with purpose today? Right? Like, in the mission there's a big mission, but there's always little battles along the way of like, what is my purpose today? How am I going to go after it? And some days it's like, I just want to be a better father today, or I want to be a better husband, or I want to be a better brother, or son. So I think it's just different. And I think everyone can kind of implement that, right? And there's certain things that, like, for me, there's things that Kobe did I would never do. He woke up at 4 a.m. every morning. I'm not doing that. Why? Yeah. I don't want to do that. Yeah. So I think it's like important to say, like, okay, I'm going to take little pieces over here, and like, what is it that I want to do personally? And that's why I'm fortunate enough to say every decision I've made, I've never felt the outside pressure of doing it for someone else's enjoyment or for someone else's purpose of who they feel like I should be. So I've always had that freedom. So that I think that's what's led me to have success. That's the way I've looked at success, not by like the people I've trained or money or anything like that. It's all about like, I have a purpose every day, and I get to live by that purpose. That's
cool.
That's the ultimate success for me right now.
That's awesome. Yeah. Very good. Is there anything else that you would want to share with young people today that are looking to achieve more in their lives? Any piece of advice that would help them along their way?
So this may sound cliche, but I've always been very much like a risk taker. Of some of it goes around like back to like pushing the boundaries of what people think you should be doing or how you should be living. But I've always been very aggressive with, if I have a goal, I'm not going to let anything not keep me from not reaching that goal.
Yeah.
So for instance, like when I decided to become a trainer, I was like, well, I don't want to just become a trainer. I want to train the best players in the world. And that was a mission I set off from day one. When I decided I want to be a trainer, I wanted to be what I felt like was the top. I wanted to get there. And the only real connection I had was my roommate in college. His brother played in the NBA. I didn't know any NBA players. There were no even players in St. Louis at the time that like they either already had trainers or anything like that. So I had to do that organically. So the first 2 years of training NBA players I did for free. So it took 8 months for me to convince. My first client was Doug McDermott. He was on the Chicago Bulls at the time. He was a rookie. And I was like, listen, I can help you. I would send film. I would do these things. He would blow me off. He wouldn't answer. And we got mutually connected from my buddy Kirk. And I was like, listen, just let me come down to Chicago. Give me 2 days. And if you don't enjoy it, if you don't like it, if you don't think you're like improving, you don't have to talk to me ever again. I'm like, just give me an opportunity and let me show I can help, and I will not charge you a dime, right? Because I don't want anything from you. I just want an opportunity. Yeah. So that's the way I looked at it. And once we went through that weekend, we just built a bond. And I think that's what a lot of people don't understand, like young kids that like, I want to become successful. A lot of it is just relationship building, right? Like you have to have a great work ethic. Sure, you have to be good at what you do. But a lot of it is like people want to be around other people that they enjoy being around. And I think building relationships has helped me expedite my process quite a bit. So I told Doug, and then from Doug, Bobby Portis was a teammate. He looked across the gym. He's like, oh, cool. Like, can you come work me out a couple times? And I told both of them, you guys are already here. You're here without anything that I've done. Let me help you get to your next contract. Don't pay me a dime until you get to your next contract, because you've earned all this money without me, right? Let me help you reach that next level. So by doing that, I earned so much trust, because I wasn't coming in there asking for handouts and being like, all right, cool, here's the payment schedule, right? Because that would have broken everything for me. So I had to grind and push, and like I had to drive to Chicago, and then I had to drive to OKC, and I did that off all my own dime. They didn't pay for, I never let them pay for meals, for hotels, for travel, for anything, because I wanted to stand by, like, I want to help you get to that next tier. So, and that's something that like most people may not want to do, right? So I think for young kids listening, it is not easy. Right? Like the number one saying I learned from like my college coach is, if it was easy, everybody would do it. Right? And that's something I looked at as like, I have this mission, and I'm not going to make an excuse of why I didn't reach it. It wasn't because of money or anything else. It's just like, I wanted to fail by not being good enough. I didn't want to fail because I threw out these ultimatums or made these decisions that probably weren't the best decisions. So for young kids, I would just say, like, whatever it is your goal, like, just get in the door. For me, if I can get in the door, I have confidence that I can take that and make something beautiful with it. So that's where it's worked out really well for me. I'm sure there's other people that have done it the same way. And that's how I always live my life, right? And it's the same thing now in the entrepreneur world. Like, if I want to raise money, which we're raising money right now, it's a whole different beast. How do I get in front of this venture capitalist? How many emails, how many calls, how many times do I have to show up to the actual place in New York to be like, hey, here's who I am, here's what I'm building, give me 5 minutes. It's a different, so that's something that's like, it's just a grind mentality, you know, and it's something that I've always loved doing. And it goes back to like the whole passion thing. Find your passion, follow it, and do whatever you can to see it through. So that's something that I think that number one thing, if I were a kid today, that if I look back on it, if I look forward of like, who am I going to be in, 15 years? How do I get there? I would do it all the same, because there's times where, again, I will fail. I'll fail all the time. People don't understand that. Like, no one just has win. That's not how life works. So it's always just the mental toughness of staying even keel, going after the next day, seeing what happens there, and then trying to compound those days. So it's something I've learned from you as a coach, to teammates, to Coach Hollander, to my parents. So it's like, it's all a learning experience.
That's cool, man. Man, Alex, I love and appreciate you. I appreciate you for sitting down here today and kind of sharing your story and your ideas and how you've been able to build successful business and just everything that you do in your life. Family, good luck with that new little girl.
Thank you.
Greatest thing. That's the greatest accomplishment,
Yeah.
right? And thank you very much for watching. See you next time on Elite in Action.